So you and I are going to drive a hybrid today. That's really nothing new. However, the mission of the hybrid we're driving, perhaps that's something unusual. Oh, did I forget to mention? It is very large. It weighs over 6,000 pounds and does not have a V8 engine. Being you guys know how much I love automotive pornography, let's make the most of this opportunity. Starting with right here, and this is on offer in two different flavors in the 2022 Toyota Tundra. There is a 3.5 twin turbocharged V6 that is 389 horsepower and 479 pound-feet of torque, or there is this, which is a hybrid. That is 437 horsepower and get this 583 pound-feet of torque. Now, how does it get to that big of a difference? Well, that's here between the engine and the transmission, and this is the first application in the Toyota universe where they don't have a hybrid that has two motor generators within a front-wheel drive system or a rear-drive electric motor. Here, there's an electric motor that sits between the engine and transmission, and this does a couple of things. Obviously, it fills in torque. However, there's also an EV mode that comes along free for the ride. Now, how do we connect that to the battery, or really, where is the battery? That is underneath the rear seat. And here you could tell this is not exactly the largest battery you've ever seen, 1.87 kilowatt hours. To give you an idea, that Mazda we just drove, the MX-30, that was a whopping 35.5 kilowatt hours, and that was only 100 miles of range. This is not a plug-in system, so yeah, there is some EV-only range, but mainly reserved for parking lot situations. The battery itself is made up of 240 cells and 40 modules. Then moving here, that's the gas tank, which gets us to fuel economy. Here, I'd love to tell you what the EPA says, but they haven't tested this vehicle. The manufacturer says with this hybrid system, 20 combined mpg. Then while we're on the topic of porn, this does not look like the Tundra that came before it. This is a box frame, so a significant change in the platform, where the previous one was different sections. It was a C-frame. From a pragmatic point of view, Mike Swears, who is the chief engineer of this vehicle, he also oversees all of the F-platform vehicles, which means to you and I, this is the same platform or same box frame that underpins the new Land Cruiser, which sadly is not in the US as of yet. Now, there is one more item we got to discuss, and that is the brakes. 13.9-inch diameter rotors in the front, 13.6 in the rear. Once again on the road, this time back in the great state of Texas. So when in Rome, definitely need to do as the Romans, as such, a pickup truck. This one, 6,185 pounds, or depending on how you express your weights and measures, 2,805 kilograms. Now, two things. If this were the most basic two-wheel drive Tundra that has the shorter cab, it would be about 5,100 pounds. And if this were the fancy limited, which we're driving without the hybrid system, it would be about 600 pounds lighter with that. Completely dropping the hammer. And oh, wait a minute. That goes pretty well. There's two switches, 2,000 RPM, you can definitely feel the hybrid system is kicking in, but at 4,000 RPM, wow, it's actually pretty quick. It sounds weird. It doesn't sound like a pickup truck in any way, shape, or form, and incredibly well matched to the 10-speed torque converter automatic. So much so, this is a very strong case that Toyota should ditch the CVT from all of their hybrid synergy drive systems because this works so well. And for the avoidance of doubt, it's very similar to that of a diesel truck in that it's flat. You get to 2,000, it starts to deliver here, and then it peaks again at 4,000. 9 and 10-speed transmissions usually have to hunt with those types of power curves. Here, it works almost lockstep. So when you and I first looked at this thing just down the road in Dallas, Toyota was very upfront about the purpose of this vehicle. It is a recreational/tow vehicle, and the reason why they say that is all about volumes. As a basis of comparison, Ford sells between 600,000 and 700,000 F-150s year in, year out, which means we could look at this one of two ways. This is a niche vehicle, or this has got to be kind of different, which means we got to understand on-road driving dynamics. And here it drives more like a pickup truck than the previous one. Feels a bit stiffer because of that box frame we talked about in the tech review. But the biggest thing you notice is the feel from the rear of the vehicle. You do notice those coil springs in the back. And kind of a recap, it's double wishbones up front, but in the rear, they ditched the leaf springs. Now it's got coil springs, and you do feel a bit better on-road ride quality, but you can't help but thinking this is still very much a pickup truck, one that has a bit of a stiffer ride. Now moving beyond the general to this specific vehicle, which for the avoidance of doubt is the limited with the Trd suspension, not a Trd Pro, which means it doesn't have the Fox shocks. Instead, it's got the Bilsteins. And the biggest difference that one would notice, there's a better balance between composure and compliance. But what exactly does that mean in this application, a tall, long, and heavy pickup truck? Well, there's good control over all planes of motion, as good as could be expected for an almost 6,200-pound vehicle. The ride quality is surprisingly good, but you can't get away from the fact that this is indeed a body-on-frame truck. Now, it's not all puppy dogs and roses. I'm not exactly surprised to tell you that steering, it's a bit overboosted, something I kind of expect from a Toyota. Granted, it doesn't feel like a Lincoln where you're going to steer it with one finger, but it does feel, it just there's no life at the steering. I'd probably like a little bit more weight, especially considering that you're going to put some extra weight in the back of that vehicle. After all, this thing is rated up to 11,400 pounds in this engine configuration. So of course, this being a pickup truck, there has to be many different flavors on offer, and that translates to the size of the vehicle. Usually I like to talk about wheelbase because that's where you package a lot of people and a lot of dogs, but that's really not the case here. There's two different flavors on offer. There is obviously a double cab, which this is, and frankly, this is the first time I'm even seeing this in person as a double cab. And then of course, there's a crew cab. They call it a Crew Max. That's the one we saw in the tech review. Now, there is a way in which they blend the beds with the actual cabs. Like for example, this being the double cab, it can have either the 6'5" bed or the 8.1 foot bed. So this is the only one that can have the longer bed. And then the Crew Max, when we were driving out on the road, that one's either 5.5 foot or 6.5 foot. Now, how does one get back here? This, I'm 6 foot in the back of the crew cab, like a charm. It's like a limousine. This, not really so much. So you know what, I'm gonna hang out here and we're gonna have to talk about one other thing. The car we were driving on the road, that was a pre-production prototype. So the interior is not what will show up at a Toyota store. This one is significantly different in terms of the tactile feel and the build quality, but something that you do notice from front to back, and this is something we've seen in other cars, not just Toyotas, is this is a bit of a better build quality than this one back here. So if you and I are going to make our way all the way to Texas, we might as well take advantage of the opportunity and do some off-roading. Huge hinweis before we get into the weeds here, literally. This is not the same truck that you and I were driving on the road. This is what I keep on referring to as the hero truck. This is a Trd Pro. Now, what does that mean? You may remember from the tech review when we had Andre from TFL Truck. He told us this really big change is the shocks. It's the 2.5-inch Fox shocks with the overflow reservoirs. Then it's fitted with a couple of TRD specific skid plates, and then there's some very thick and very red anti-roll bars. So this is definitely a more interesting vehicle. Outside, it's capped with 18-inch wheels. So for the avoidance of doubt, Tundras can be had with 20-inch wheels or 18-inch wheels, and that's rounded out with the use of the off-road tires. Let's go to the second challenge here, and that's some articulation. Got some logs here. Now this has been set up by Toyota, so the articulation brings up an incredibly good point, and that is a turtle. We gotta let the turtle go, man. We can't hurt the turtle. That's super cool. This is like the welcome committee for San Antonio, Texas. We're gonna pass by the turtle, say hello, Mr. Turtle, and he is going to confirm what I'm about to tell you. The ground clearance, depending on the flavor of Tundra, is anywhere between 10 inches and 10.8 inches. You can imagine this is the one that has the highest ground clearance because it has a bit more lift. It's 1.1 inches higher than other non-TRD Pros. So you and I learned about 10 years ago that design sells cars with the Hyundai Elantra. Apparently that impacts pickup trucks as well. I sat with one of the designers, actually the guy who leads exterior design. He is a major car guy, has like a ton of old 60s and 70s Americana kind of cars. So he is a guy that knows grills, and apparently there are 6 different grills on offer depending on the flavor of Tundra that one selects. Like for example, this is a limited, so it's black plastic, nothing too fancy, kind of functional. That one's a 1794, that's like a Longhorn Lexus, a lot more chrome. This one is my favorite, not just because it's an off-road and it's like the hero truck. A couple of reasons. Number one, it's got the light bar, it's got the marker lights here, but more importantly, it's the only heritage touch in a Tundra, and that is the Toyota spelled out in big block letters. So while you and I get used to the sound of this thing, let's pick up our discussion from the tech review regarding the UX and then layer on some tactile feel discussion. First stop would be the UX, something I've learned in driving it. There are different settings, so you can set profiles kind of like your computer. Like I share my Mac with Kumo, he's got his own profile, I've got my own profile, and it switches the preferences of the computer. Same thing here, but it picks up the seats and the mirrors. But it does another interesting trick. The vehicle can pair with multiple phones. Now that's not exactly new, but what is interesting, it's smart enough to pick up which phone is active. So let's say for the sake of discussion, I'm driving and it's paired with my phone, but Kumo's phone rings, the system would then switch over to his phone and take that call. And then second, and this is not so much a Tundra thing, this is what I'm noticing as a trend in other cars going forward. Can I say to Mike Swears and the rest of his team, arigato gozaimasu, for giving us a real gear shift. Not a knob, not something up here, but a gear shift. That is all. No, it is not that time to play your favorite game on the options game because we have no pricing. In fact, we're not going to have pricing for a couple of weeks, which means Kumo and I could not sit in this episode for that long. So let's take a stab in the dark here without numbers. And the best way to do that is to put this on a spectrum with the Swiss Army knife that is the F-150 over here and the much nicer inside that is the Ram over here. The Toyota kind of sits closer to the Ram. It's not quite as fancy as on the inside, but in reality, it is a much more pleasant place to be than other Toyotas and not just pickup trucks. But really what this thing is about is that propulsion system. And Toyota, they will go out of their way to tell you that this is a recreational towing vehicle. I would argue it's more than that. It is a very large 6,200-pound showcase of a new type Toyota hybrid propulsion system, which brings us to the wish list. This shouldn't just be in a pickup truck. This setup of the motor generator between the engine and the transmission and the way it delivers power should be in other vehicles. Hint, hint, I'm thinking Lexus, but this isn't just about big Lexus like an LS500 or a big truck that has a Toyota badge on it. It could be something smaller. I'm thinking IS500 with that motor generator. That thing could be 600 horsepower tuned properly and have literally no issue in terms of turbo lag because it wouldn't have turbochargers. Now I want the V8 to be very clear here, not the turbo V6 with the motor generator in a Lexus application. If you want to put it in a Toyota, that's fine. I'll go with the V6 twin turbo. Anyway, this is the point of the episode where I turn this around to you guys to opine in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV all one word, MotoManTV all one word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, I once again would humbly request your help with the algorithm. Now, why do I ask that? Well, a huge majority of you that watch these episodes are not subscribed. So what does help with the algorithm mean? Well, that means, of course, subscribe, hit notifications, of course, hit like, but most importantly, share these episodes with all of your friends on your socials. Until I see you in the next episode, bis später.